Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Best Fleets to Drive For podcast. My name is Mark Morrell. I'm co-creator of the Best Fleets to Drive For program, and I am being kind of non-specific about which episode this is because I don't really know when it's going to air. I think it's going to be our May episode, but we'll find out when it's published just how wildly wrong I am. So I'm off to a great start, as usual. I'm joined today by the best overall fleet in the large carrier division, C.A.T, and Marc Blanchette and Michael Robinson joining me today. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
So we are going to talk about a bunch of different things, and I'll start, and I probably told you guys this story at the convention just before we announced you as the overall winners. But when your interview happened this year, it really stuck out for us. I remember Jane did the interview and she came out afterwards and was like, wow, I don't know what those guys did in the past year, but they are just killing it this time. So they're my vote for a fleet to watch. If they don't make it to the top 20, they're my vote for a fleet to watch. It was like, wow, something has changed in this company. Of course, you didn't need to be a fleet to watch because you not only made it onto the top 20, but sailed through all the way into the top to be the best performer in the large carrier category. So I'm going to start by asking you guys, what happened in the past year, or what happened in the preceding year? You had been involved in this program before and had done quite well as a finalist, but hadn't made it onto the top 20. Obviously, you changed quite a bit. So take us through that past year, or I guess now the past year and a half, and what you went through, what you changed, and how you went through all of that.
Mark, would you like to take it away to start with?
Sure. I'll show off and then I'll hand it off to you. But I think it started with the results from last year for us. Is we recognized we've recognized for a long time, being part of this program before that drivers are the key to our business and the key to success. And so last year when we got the results, we really dug in and said, hey, we thought we had what we needed to at least be a fleet to watch. And not hitting the mark there, we said, okay, we're going to dig in a little bit more. So we took the booklet, we did the consultation, and then we looked at everything and looked at the programs that we had in place, and we really identified those key areas that either we needed to reinforce or we needed to put a lot more emphasis on. And so I think that was the starting point for us, saying, okay, let's get this right this year. And then Michael and I took it all the way up to ownership and said, here's what we need to do in an industry where we have struggle across to recruit drivers. We need to get this right. This is absolutely something we need to do. And we presented our plan to at least hit, like you said earlier, Mark, a fleet to watch. The owners signed off immediately, said that absolutely they believe in the program, they believe in in what our plan to move forward, and then we began to execute. And that's where Michael and his team really identified some key areas and put some action plans into place, working with myself on the marketing side and the communication side to make sure that it's getting out there. But talking, I think I'll hand it over to Michael here, but because the red thread really was the key to our success, and Michael is the owner of that program. So Michael, maybe you want to talk a little bit about how the red thread led to our success.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And as Mark said, we made sure we took this to the top and had made sure everyone understood where we were trying to go with this and what we wanted to achieve. And we know what we needed to achieve, and we wanted to achieve retention and not just drivers staying, but making them want to stay here. And then talking about C.A.T as a company and someone that people want to drive for. So it was at the beginning of last year. I'd been tasked with a retention program to get our retention numbers down, our turnover numbers down, of course. And we started building that program with the corporate team at C.A.T. We had everybody involved, from our finance, our CFO, obviously to the VP of safety. So everybody was involved, and it was nice to see people come together, the leaders come together and start owning parts of things that we were trying to achieve. So we decided that we needed to put a name to our retention program. The name is the Red Thread. And as soon as it started having a name assigned to it, it kind of grew legs of its own, and people really started to talk about the Red Thread and how we do that kind of use the Red Thread and that retention piece in everything we do, from what Mark does as a business development leader, and talking to the customers and understanding what facilities, as an example, that the customers have for our drivers to use while they're there. From that to understanding the best place that our drivers can fuel at, again, so they have the right facilities and they can, shower and use washrooms and eat and stuff like that. So we incorporated, I believe it was 16 programs that we had added into retention within that first 6 months. Now, as Mark mentioned, the year before, we'd learned a lot, kind of when we went through our questionnaire and understood some of the things that maybe we hadn't articulated well that we had actually done. So we started to build on those as well. Not low-hanging fruit, that's not the right thing to say, but things that we knew we could improve very quickly, with little effort, just kind of communicating more correctly, getting the drivers more involved, and we started there, and then build the Red Thread, and then, like I said, added around 16 more projects in to make the drivers happy coming to work every day. So yeah. Okay,
so obviously I have to follow up on that. 16 programs in 1 year, that's crazy.
Yes.
So how did you how did you do that on top of your regular job? I mean, your job is usually pretty busy anyway. So how did you add those programs? And just as important, how did you get everybody in the company buying in and understanding? That's a lot of change management to work through.
It is. And I can say it was actually easier than expected. Getting those leaders involved and having the leaders truly believe in a program. And I think that was the key element, is selling the program, the Red Thread project, enough to have people bought into it. And obviously it had to be sold properly to the ownership team first. Although they told us to go away and do it, we still had to sell it back to them, say, this is the pathway we want to go. And that buy-in was quite easy, as we'd articulated in such a way that, hey, this can work. And then we did the same with all the corporate leaders. And I think excitement comes into it, getting excited about the program, saying, what we can achieve, how we can do things better. And of course, getting the operations team involved is very easy, because we can fill these trucks. If we can retain people, start filling trucks a bit more, and obviously they can deliver a whole lot more and service our customers. So that buy-in was pretty simple. And I think the question, how did we do that? Get 16 new projects in and actually achieve those. That was a little bit more difficult for sure. But it came to everybody buying into it at that corporate level, and then their leaders buying into it at the director level, and truly believing that, hey, this is something we can achieve. And what we set out to do was have the drivers hold us to task on the Red Thread. So explaining to the drivers and educating them on what we're trying to achieve, and then them being able to walk in and someone saying something to them and them saying, well, that's not very Red Thread of you. And that's what we wanted to achieve, and hold the leaders to task. And we got there, and we continue to get there today. And out of the 16 projects we led, they are up and going, and they still are alive and being worked on and improved. And one thing we found, Mark, was it was okay to make mistakes on some projects and say, hey, this didn't work. Just because it was an idea that we had, it didn't work. Is there another way of doing it? And if there wasn't, let's pivot very quickly and go into the next project, so we can actually put our efforts there. And a lot of the projects we came up with were from the pulse surveys from the drivers. What do you want to see? What do we need to improve? What can we do better? So a lot of projects come from there for sure.
And if I can, I think we glazed over it, but when ownership gives the green light, it somewhat clears a path for everyone to jump on board, right? And when we started to build momentum on a few projects and see the early successes, the feedback from the drivers, the retention rates go up, all of a sudden you see people that they want to jump on this train. They see the success of it and they want to be part of it. And you were building momentum. So then 16 projects between 2 or 3 people, very difficult. 16 projects between, 15, 20 leaders across an organization become very manageable. So it's just a question of, I think, I can't say that it was entirely intentional, but I think we were very thoughtful in our approach, making sure ownership bought in, getting the green light, and having them remind everyone who they worked with that this is critically important for the success of our organization. So again, 16 projects between 2-3 people, very difficult. 16 projects across an organization becomes very manageable and a recipe for success.
Well, there are several things that I have to follow up on with that. A few statements that you guys made that really deserve more attention. First, yeah, you reference this as well, is starting from the top. If you get executive buy-in, ownership buy-in, it makes a big difference, and it, as you say, clears the path. We absolutely see this. This is like the #1 recipe for success in the Best Fleets program, is get the executives on board. Without them, you're dead in the water. If you don't have that sort of ownership or executive buy-in, you're never getting anywhere. So you have to start with that. But sort of at the other end of that spectrum, you said something, Michael, that I thought was really interesting. You said having the drivers hold us to task. And that's a critical part of it as well, that sort of completing that circle of, you're trying to do things, you've got executive support, but you're putting it out there for the drivers, and you need the drivers to come back and say, this is or this isn't working. So talk a little bit more about how you had the drivers hold you to task. Did you specifically say, hold our feet to the fire on these things, or is it something that just happened because you were polling them for feedback periodically?
We asked the drivers, we told the drivers what we were trying to do, what we were trying to achieve with their help, and we asked them to come back to us and tell us what was working and what was not. Now, we do that on a number of different platforms. Of course, our pulse surveys that we'll send out every 90 days, and we have surveys that we have on our Isaac tablet that are more often for, when we target certain driver groups. And then, of course, we do our driver meetings that are in person a few times a year as well. And the drivers are very vocal during those meetings and will tell us one way or the other if things are working. And of course, we have a number of forward-facing, driver-facing departments, like our operations team, like our safety and recruiting teams, that will constantly get feedback. And we gave those office employees a platform to talk about what the drivers were saying. Instead of just going next door and saying to their boss, hey, this driver isn't happy, we actually gave them a platform where they can go on to, we have a live SharePoint with a spreadsheet on it that people can come in and say, hey, I just spoke to this driver and this is some of the issues we're seeing. And the executive team can go in, take a look at that, and then, hey, we need somebody else to get involved with this driver. How can we help this? So it's very live and very transparent. It's transparent.
Interesting. You also pointed out something that I think a lot of people could stand to learn from. You said it's okay to make mistakes and figure out what's working and not working. So that's another thing that we find very insightful as we go through the Best Fleets evaluation and we're interviewing people, the things that they're doing, the things they're not doing. I find those stories of failure to be much more illuminating than the successes, because the successes in a lot of cases, they kind of get spun like it's magic. We tried this, it worked beautifully, everything is great. Well, there's no real story there. There's nothing that anybody learns. So, it's much more interesting to hear somebody say, well, we tried this and it was a complete failure. And then we came back and we tried this other thing and it was a little better and it took us 3 tries, but we got it now. So, that to me shows a lot of people that are definitely learning. They're not sort of putting their head in the sand and saying, oh, it's all fine. They're collecting that feedback and acting on it. So you guys obviously figured that out as well. So what were some of the things that you tried that didn't work out or that you ended up having to go back and change afterwards?
So our ambassador program was like that. We had a couple of tries at it, and it never fell off the page, but we knew it wasn't going right. And one of the things is, you know, our mentors, our drivers on the road, we call them our friends on the road, they actually are able to help drivers, and we're able to pay them their phone bill, or up to $100 a month in order for them to help us with communicating with our drivers on the road and stuff like that. Well, our ambassadors, our internal staff, don't quite have that. So it's very easy to walk away from that as a program. Not that we did have anyone walk away from it, but they certainly did express some frustrations when we had a small amount of them to start with. And again, it got bigger very quickly as we recruited more drivers. And all of a sudden, an ambassador had 3 or 4 drivers to deal with on a weekly basis that wouldn't normally speak with drivers because they're in the finance department, as an example. Yeah, so we had to go back to that and say, okay, what is the maximum amount of drivers that an ambassador can have? And everyone has a different capacity, of course, but we want to recognize that actually there is a limit at some point. And then again, going back to the ambassador that doesn't normally deal with drivers, what questions do they need to ask? How do they need to ask them? How can they, monitor if somebody isn't actually having a good day? So going back and educating on that. So I think we had this great idea between a few of us, and launched it out there. And was it premature? Probably. We went back, fixed it, still a little premature, went back, fixed it again. And here we are today with a great program, lots of input, lots of communication. But we've found we keep going back every month to make sure that, hey, is this working? Let's continue to talk to our ambassadors. Let's talk to the drivers, and we'll see on an exit interview, hey, my ambassador didn't reach out to me on this date, and this was the date I needed to speak to them. The next day was too late. So it's kind of getting through those problems as well, and those, communicating how to do this differently, not better, just differently, in order to, we knew the program was going to work. We just had to get there. And yeah, we struggled for months on that one, I've got to say, and we got there today. It will be better this time next year, hopefully. But that was certainly one that sticks out that we struggled with.
There was also, if we go back to the basics, we struggled with communication at times, right? And when we looked at how do we communicate with our drivers, and when's the right time to communicate with our drivers, and we have ambassadors that are office based, and it's just a question of, we thought this was just going to roll out really well, but then it's getting them in the mindset that no, a driver is driving and it's safe driving. We got to communicate them during their times, and we've got to schedule our driver sessions and our driver meetings and our focus group meetings on the times where they're not driving that suits to them. And so, at first there's just a small little thing that we failed on is, hey, why are we not getting buy-in? Why are drivers not attending these meetings? Like, what's going on? Maybe they're not interested. And then all of a sudden you speak, we go back out and we speak to the drivers, and it's like, no, guys, I'd love to, but I can't do that while I'm driving, or I'm at a customer site, timing it to when they're available, right? Not thinking like it. So you have people that are on the forefront with drivers and understand the driver lifestyle. But when you start involving a lot of people that are just, they're not as driver facing, or they were not as driver facing as they are today, or some other departments, is getting them to understand the lifestyle and the day-to-day tasks of a driver, and getting them to communicate to get the best feedback. That was a small little failure, but a huge learning and a great way to put everyone who is in the ambassador program, who doesn't deal with a driver day in and day out, to actually put them in the shoes of a driver and go, okay, I get it now. Like, I understand. So it's, again, like you said earlier, Mark, it's a huge, sometimes the failures are our best learning. We couldn't have asked for a better opportunity to teach our organization about the life of a driver than literally that one particular failure.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point, actually, Mark, because we've done our driver meetings at the same time of year. Obviously, there's a couple of times of the year where the market is a little slower. The Thanksgiving, Easter, when things are just a little bit slower, both sides of the board, and it only matches up a couple of times a year. So we typically do our driver meetings around that, and have done for years and years. So we see that the buy-in wasn't there as much as it was. And yeah, that Mark actually put a survey out on, when would you like to have your driver meetings? And our last one we did was between 7 and 9 o'clock at night, on I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday. I can't remember the exact day. But yeah, we will always do that. We'll always go back and ask, and if there's different times that the drivers want, then that's the time we'll do it. And they typically kick off at 7, and try to finish at 9. Obviously, we have to do them in both English and French, but so they do go on for a little longer than most. But yeah, it's fine to do. Like, if the drivers can make it, if I can get 10% more drivers in at 7 o'clock at night, like, it's worth doing.
Interesting. I don't think I've ever heard about somebody doing those on a weeknight. That's very different.
Yeah, it
things
worked.
you
We
learn.
were surprised when they wanted it. We were, maybe the Saturday was working for us, and we didn't mind. We didn't mind when they when we would come in and do the meetings. But yeah, it was a weekday evening is what we went with, and the drivers love it.
Yeah. It's also worth pointing out that you didn't start from a blank slate on this. In order for this to work, you obviously had a foundation of a lot of the pieces in place already. You talk about having communication tools and having a survey program in place, and you had kind of these outreach programs that you were already working on. So you kind of took those pieces and just sort of put them together in a bit of a different way and assembled some other pieces on top of it. I think, nobody's starting from scratch. If you're a fleet that doesn't do regular surveys, that doesn't have that kind of ambassador or mentor kind of program, you don't have those kind of communication tools in place, you're not getting to this level in a year. Like, you guys could get there in a year because you already had a lot of those tools in place, I think.
Yeah, that's very fair to say. And I think us actually going, over a year ago now, sitting down with you, Mark, and going through some of the things that we could have improved on, or that we just didn't articulate well. I think that's when we realized, hold on, we actually do a lot of stuff already. It's just a matter of building on this. And we've been, we've bought into the Ray Hyatt program in the past a number of years ago. Fantastic program to kind of concentrate on that. That retention piece. So it's there. It's always been the forefront. Otherwise, we'd have no drivers, right? Our turnover is actually quite good. It's just, how do we improve it? And there was a point where, and going back that 18 months ago, where we made a plan on, okay, I would actually like to be on stage for this award. We'd like to be a fleet to watch. We'd like to be recognized, because when we spoke about the Red Thread as a project, one of the foundations of what we had was, we want other drivers who work for other companies to recognize C.A.T as a company to come and work for. How do we do that? How do we communicate outside of our four walls? We know we treat our drivers well, our drivers are happy, but how do we convince other drivers to come and work for us? And obviously an award is good for that. And we thought about this, and then it disappeared. We stopped thinking about awards. That's not the reason why we're doing this. The reason why we're doing this is to keep those drivers happy and have good drivers come and work for us, and make sure that drivers can retire at C.A.T after many years of being happy. And we completely we were blown away. Obviously, I think you knew that the day that we won the award, blown away that we'd even come this far.
The other aspect to Mark, though, is not to have the fear of actually tearing a program that you have in place, tearing it down to the floor and rebuilding it if you have to, right? There was a lot of fear internally. Like, let's look at that ambassador program and saying, like, how do we redesign this? How do we make this so that it makes sense? And do we need to tear it down to the floor and rebuild it? And so it's scary. Absolutely. Hey, this is working. It's getting us some results. Maybe we shouldn't touch it. What if we fix it? What if we change it and it doesn't work? And it goes back to a couple of minutes ago, we talked about, is not having that fear and really working on, hey, if we want to get better, sometimes we just have to start from the ground up on certain things and not be afraid to fail. And if it fails, then we know at least we can go back to what we had was working. If we're not driving the same results, we at least have a model of what we can get back to. But let's tear it down and let's rebuild it. And so I think there's a lot of fear in carriers across the US and Canada. Like, I've got something that's working. I don't know if I want to touch it. But if you do touch it and you take the best practices and you triple your results, it's worth all the effort to tear it down and to deal with the fear. So some of the programs, we had, and we tweaked them and tailored them to get and make them produce and have better results. And some we just said, hey, like, I think we need to look at this and rebuild it from the ground up and see what comes of it. So you have to take what you have, evaluate it, and then go from there.
Interesting. One of the other things that you said right near the beginning was that once you gave this program a name, it kind of got legs of its own, which we've definitely seen in other places where you give a program a name, it becomes real, and people start to, thinking about it as a real entity, and they get behind it a lot more easily. So why Red Thread? Where did that name come from?
Okay. So yes, and the name did help for sure. And a red thread, it was we were chatting. A few of us were sitting around chatting about what we were going to call this name. And the red thread was mentioned, and the idea behind this program was for it to be entwined in absolutely everything we do. Every single decision that we make that has anything to do with a driver, it has to be entwined. We have to think back to retention, and we can say retention all day long, but we made it a name, and a red thread was it. And basically, so hundreds of years ago, in the British Navy, they used to put a piece of red thread through all of their ropes, and that was how they identified what their ropes were, that they owned those ropes. And you couldn't actually pull that red thread out without the rope completely dismantling. And that's the idea behind this, is if we can intertwine this through every department, through every division, through every decision we make for our drivers, it can't be pulled apart without dismantling our retention for our drivers. And that's where we wanted to get to, and we did.
That's interesting. So it's not just a name, but you've got sort of a story or analogy that goes with it that helps people to get behind it, to understand the importance of it and the value of that as well. And that's, in this particular case, retention running through everything, and you can't remove that without destroying the rope. You can't destroy, or you can't remove it without destroying everything, which really nicely illustrates what you were trying to accomplish with that. Very nicely done.
Thank you. It was, and I think that's how we got that buy-in from that corporate team when we explained it like this, and truly understanding that, hey, this is what we're going to do. And we actually, we're in a process now of Mark's team is making a symbol, a red thread symbol that we can, put at the bottom of letters that we send to new drivers as a welcome letter, and actually adding it. And we only put this in place probably about 6 weeks ago. Does every project we want to do have a symbol of it? Well, the answer is no to that. But this one was important enough to say, actually, we will have this for the next 25 years, and we want to recognize it today, and we want to be able to recognize it in years down the road. So yeah, we're creating that. So it's something that hopefully you'll see, Mark, in certainly by next year. But Mark's team is working on that, and we're very excited to see what that's going to look like for us.
So the key then to being a best fleet to drive for is to have a deep understanding of nautical history. That's where everybody needs to be.
or have someone from Britain on your team. One of the two. Like you decide.
Yeah. But that does kind of come around to an important part of all of this, and you did touch on it a little bit. The need to really tell the story, not just to be doing something, but to be able to describe it, explain it, and talk about all the things that you're doing. And that's often one of the things that comes up when people look through their results, if they don't make the list, or even when they do make the list and they're comparing it to the scores, they look at it and they realize that they are doing these things and they just hadn't said anything about it, or they forgot to mention it, or they didn't really explain it very well. And I always say that that's a critical part of being a best fleet, is knowing what your story is and how to tell it. And it's not just about our program, but it's about the business. You've got to communicate that to your current employees. You've got to communicate that to potential employees, and everybody needs to understand and be living that same story in order to have success. So it sounds like you put a lot of effort into that as well. And certainly in your best fleet's responses, you absolutely put a lot of effort into changing how you articulated the things that you're doing and talking about that. So were there any particular tips that you could give people, or anything that you did as sort of an approach to think about that? Was it even something that was conscious, or was it something that just kind of happened?
It was a conscious thought. I think after our discussions with you, Mark, and looking at our results, I think Michael and I took some time to think about how we wanted to affect change going forward. And kudos to Michael. He brought forward the red thread idea. We looked at it. We said that makes perfect sense, because without retention, our company falls apart. And I think the story started there. And like you said, everyone wants to be part of the story. When the story starts generating momentum, it's they want to be part of it. And when you can tell it, instead of just talking about a program sounds very generic, but when you start talking about it and building the life of the story and what you're doing and how it ties everything together, the success really is around that, is tying it all together, building a story and being able to sell it at any level. And it really is, again, kudos to Michael for looking at that and bringing that forward, because I think that's a big component to the success of our initiative and our results, was really about building that story and tying it together.
Yeah, you just said something that I think everybody should really think about. So I'm going to reiterate it. Everyone wants to be part of a story, 100%. And it's part of why it's important to be clear on what your story is and make sure that it's being told properly, because yeah, people want to be part of that. If you've got a real story about what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it and how it fits together, people want to be part of that. It gives them something to grab onto and to, I don't know, occupy a space in their head about how they fit into it and what they can do to propel that story forward. So that's a really nice way of putting it.
And it's the raison d'être, as we say in French, right? The reason for, of why people be this, is that story.
Yeah, absolutely. I also just coming back to the red thread and the idea that retention is kind of wound up in everything that you do. I think that's a really nice observation as well, and really nice way of looking at it, because a lot of fleets get this idea that if they go to fix retention, we'll just hire a retention manager, and that person's job will be to fix retention. And I always say, like, that's pointless. You can't fix retention by one manager. What is that manager going to do, right? They're going to have to change everything about the business, because retention is a result of everything else that the business is doing. So it was really smart of you to realize that it's intertwined with everything. And if you want to improve retention, you have to do a whole lot of different things, and you have to make an effort in a lot of different areas and bring a lot of people into it in order to have that kind of success. It's the only way to really have it stick.
And Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the ambassador program was critical to that, right? You have people looking at this going, why am I signing up for this? And I own business development and marketing, and one of my business development directors came up and said, I'm going to sign up for this, but I'm not sure how I'm going to have an impact. And so it was showing is like, you will have a measured impact. And when you start talking to drivers and they feel the communication is not just at a retention director or a safety director, but it's across the organization, and they pick up the phone and call you and you answer, I guarantee you're going to feel the impact you're making. Well, literally 2 weeks ago, I'm doing a one-on-one with him, and he says to me, I could not be happier with my engagement or involvement in this program, because you're absolutely right. I speak to drivers. They thank me for just having the conversation with them, helping them get to where they need to go and pointing them in the right direction if they don't have the information. And they appreciate that they're not speaking to someone who it's their job, right? They're speaking to someone who actually wants to do this and is taking time out of their job to do it. So it was pretty impactful for him to come back and have that realization going, wow, okay, you guys were absolutely right. It does make a difference. It's bigger difference than I ever thought about it. And it's absolutely impressive to see the impact across the organization and people coming to that realization, saying, I'm signing up, but I'm questioning. I'm not sure, but I kind of want to do, I want to do something. I want to help. And then all of a sudden going, wow, this is huge.
And your director of sales, Mark, that you're referring to, his engagement is next level. He wants to sit in on their 30, 60, 90-day meetings they have with safety and operations team, and obviously we're like, yes, of course, if it helps with the driver understanding what we're trying to achieve, and you've been able to speak to the driver about those achievements that we're looking for the next 30-day milestone, like, let's do this. And I've never seen that before, that kind of engagement, and Pierre David is fantastic, but like, we see other people doing a very similar, having a similar engagement, and it's so good to see that people come to the door and say, I want to be a part of this program. How do I become a part of this? I want to help drivers. Or, hey, I've just had a driver come in and speak to me. I think I've helped them. Can I also be a part of this program? It's so good to see. It's kind of like you say, getting that life of its own, and people are engaged with it, and it's great. And again, as I mentioned already, we're spread out across North America, but we certainly have a French-speaking part to play in Quebec, and seeing the engagement coming out of Quebec, where our HQ is, has been great as well.
Nice. Okay. So last question for today. What's been the mood and the experience after the win, after you guys were unveiled as the winners? What's it been like at the office there?
So it's been great, of course. Very unexpected. Lots of phone calls, lots of text messages, and lots of conversations around it. Going back to the office, and it's really, and I've been a part of these programs in the past and seen them even as when I used to drive a truck, and seen that companies have been awarded this, but never really thought too much about it. And actually having drivers come up and say, wow, we did this, like we are a part of this, was so good to see, so good to have those conversations, because they know what we're trying to achieve, and them understanding the program, recognizing for what it is, and then us going ahead and winning that for this year. Yeah, I can't believe that how engaged the drivers are with those conversations. It's so good.
And we've seen increased buy-in, right? And not to say that people were not buying in. It's just all of a sudden, it's when we came back with the award, and hey, I helped with that, and I'm glad I'm part of this. And and other people coming, how do I get engaged? The only challenge is, now that we've set the bar, the expectation is that. So it's a good problem to have, but overall, it's just, you've got company buy-ins, you've got other divisions coming, say, how do we replicate your success? How do we do all this? And so it's been incredible. But again, it's okay. It's great. Now, similar to any sort of sports analogy, is we have our parade. Now, how do we replicate it next year? What do we need to do to go and do it? And so we're working on some things to tweak, like I said earlier, look at if we need to rip it down and rebuild it. And so hopefully have a very good result next year as well.
Yep. And we're hoping to see to certainly hear the red thread a lot more often through our other divisions, as this retention program has been rolled out to all of our divisions. So Mark, Trish, as you interview other companies next year that come under the C.A.T umbrella, I'm sure you'll be hearing a red thread there as well.
All right. Well, I think we're going to be looking forward to that. So that's going to do us for today. So thanks very much for your time and sharing your process and your thoughts. It's really inspiring and lots of good information. Thanks, guys, for being part of it.
Well, thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Marc and Trish. Thank you.